Hey, everybody. So there are a few things that are unique to academic writing, and we've spoken about a few of those things. One is to give proper attribution to the person that you are borrowing ideas from. But the other thing is learning how to incorporate those quotations or those paraphrases in such a way that they seamlessly fit with your own words. And that's something that you really learn to do the more you do it. You just have to have experience doing it. So I have a little presentation here um, based off of the chapter of a book called They Say, I Say, and this is working with quotes in academic writing. So I want you to think about academic writing kind of as what we call this unending conversation. The rhetoric scholar Kenneth Burke uses this metaphor of the unending conversation to explain what we do in academic writing. So he says here that he wants you to imagine that you're entering a parlor or a living room or, a place. You come in late to a party, and when you arrive, there are people who long preceded you and they're engaged in a heated discussion, something that's too heated for them to pause and explain to you exactly what it's about. And in fact, that discussion has been taking place for a really long time, even before those people got there. And so that nobody present is qualified to retrace for you all of the steps that have taken place before. So you stand there, you listen for a while until you decide that you've caught the gist of the argument, and then you put in your 2 cents. Somebody answers, you answer them, and then another comes to your defense, another person aligns themselves with you or against you, and either to the embarrassment or gratification of the opponent, depending on the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. It is unending. The hour grows late and you must depart. You must go home. And you do depart with that discussion still vigorously in progress. So if you think of the academic conversation or the scholarly conversation as something that's been taking place for such a long time, there are many people who have come before you who have said certain things about your topic, and there will be many people who come after you adding to that conversation. And you're there in the middle and you are adding your own personal perspective in the academic or the scholarly conversation. So think of it as this unending conversation. It doesn't stop after you've put in your 2 cents, right? It continues on afterwards. So one thing to keep in mind is that when you're engaging in academic writing, you are entering this unending scholarly conversation. And so what that means is that you're presenting the words or ideas of others, that is the they say, while also setting up your own argument, and that is the I say part. So you do this in a few ways, right? We do this by paraphrasing, by summarizing, or by quoting directly the words of other people. And then you are going to offer your own explanation or your own interpretation of what that other person means, all in the effort to prove your own point. And that point that you're trying to prove is your thesis, right? That is the main argument of your writing in these essays. So when do you quote and when don't you quote? To quote or not to quote? Well, why do we quote? First of all, we want to give your writing credibility. Remember, we spoke about the rhetorical appeals, and if we use the appeal of ethos, we're giving our writing credibility when we quote notable scholars who are in the field who are very intelligent and eloquent about certain things. So we use quotes to give credibility to our own writing. We also use quotes to provide evidence or proof for our arguments. And it's important that you strike a balance. So, for instance, quoting a paragraph every other page is probably not the best idea. If you quote too little, you might not be able to present the original ideas accurately, right? if you're just taking little snippets. But if you quote too much, you may not have enough of your own ideas, your own insights, or your own commentary. So it's important to strike that balance. You want to get the most bang for your buck when you're quoting. So of course, that begs the question, do quotes speak for themselves? So according to the author of the book, They Say, I Say, Gerald Graff, he says, because the meaning of a quotation is obvious to them, many writers assume that this meaning will also be obvious to their readers, when often it is not. Writers who make this mistake think that their job is done when they've chosen a quotation and inserted it into their text. They draft an essay, slap in a few quotations, and whammo, they're done. Of course, we know that's not the case, right? So how do we avoid that? How do we avoid just dropping and running, right? Quoting is more than just what they say. You need to choose your quotes wisely so you get the most bang for your buck. So, quoting a whole paragraph may not be the most effective use of the original author's words, right? If you can find sentences that you like that are within the same paragraph and you think they're related, you can always just choose those sentences, maybe put in ellipses to show that you've skipped some words, or put in some brackets to show if you've added words to have it make sense, right? You want to get the most bang for your quotation buck. And I know I've written this in my feedback before. So it's important also to frame your quotes. You do that by giving proper attribution, right? You say who said the quote, you tell what it means, and then you also explain how that applies to your argument. You're not just dropping and running, right? And the point we want to emphasize is that quoting what they say must always be connected with what you say. I cannot stress this enough. I am more interested in your own ideas. Yes, it's great that so-and-so thinks this and so-and-so thinks that. That gives you credibility, right? You are agreeing with these people. But I am really interested in what you say, what you think, because if you're not expressing your own original ideas, your own opinions, then what is the point of writing, right? You want to present your ideas and your arguments. And so you do that and you write it, and then other people can read it and say, hey, wow, I had never really thought about that way before. So that's why we write. And we use those quotes from other people to say, hey, I'm not the only person who thinks this way. This person who's really super smart also thinks this way, right? And that gives you ethos or credibility. So again, you want to quote relevant passages. As I said before, you don't just choose any old quote just to use a selected source, right? You want to make sure that your chosen quotes support your argument. And of course, you want to make sure that they still fit after editing and revising. So you need to be prepared to select new quotes or find new sources as you go through the process of writing and revising. You may find that you've kind of changed your ideas and you still have this old quote, except it doesn't really fit or it doesn't say what you really need it to say. So that's why the annotated bibliography is a work in progress, right? That's a working thing. And you may need to choose some new sources when you change ideas. It's just, you need to be flexible in your writing. So, framing, I used this framing before, right? And some instructors call this the quote sandwich technique. And you do this by introducing the quote, by using the author's first name and setting up the quotation. And we've used that as signal phrases. And then you insert the quoted text and then explain what the author means, providing your interpretation. So if you think of the introduction and then the explanation as the pieces of bread and the quoted text as the meat of your sandwich, then you have that quote sandwich metaphor there. And the image from from They Say, I Say, don't be a hit and run quoter. And here they have Play-Doh and just somebody driving away. So don't just drop a quote and leave it alone, right? You need to provide some context. If you frame the quote in this way, it's not going to be an orphan in your work without any frame of reference or without any context. So step one, we introduce the quote, right? And we can do this in 3 ways. You could introduce the quote with a signal phrase, which we've spoken about before. In Notes of a Native Son, James Baldwin asserts, quote. So here we have the name of the text that's being quoted from, as well as the author's name. You could also use a colon to introduce the quote. At this point, Baldwin became frightened and worried, colon, quote, I begun to realize I was in a country I knew nothing about, in the hands of a people I did not understand at all. And then we have the parenthetical reference. So remember that we use colons to make things stand out, right? We do that when we're presenting a list of things often, or if we are saying, hey, I really want you to pay attention to this. So you can introduce it with a colon. Here we have Baldwin presented as last name only. We have to assume that we already had a first attribution where we've used the author's full name, and then this is a subsequent citation. You could also use a quote to finish a sentence that you've started. He did not know what to expect from the French people because he, quote, had no grasp of the French character. And then we have the author, last name, and page number in the parenthetical citation. So that's also another way. And I do have a handout that's related to this that shows you various ways that you can introduce your quote and integrate your quote. Of course, we also have verbs that you can use to introduce the quotation. These are what we call vivid verbs, and we've talked about this in previous presentations. Remember, MLA uses present tense, and of course you want to make sure that your verb ending matches the subject of your sentence. I won't go through that list, but you can take a look at them for yourself. Then step 2, right? So we have step 1, introduce the quote, put in the quote, and then step 2 is explaining the quote. Why is the quote relevant? How does it strengthen what you have to say? So the example we provide here is Baldwin asserts that, quote, we had no way of controlling the sequence of events and could not possibly guess what this sequence would be, end quote. And then the explanation here in green. With this statement, Baldwin clearly demonstrates his lack of familiarity and therefore comfort with the situation he finds himself in. So by doing that, by explaining the quote, you give not only an explanation or provide context, but you again link back to what your thesis is all about, right? So we have some templates here. I'm not going to read through them all. I do have a handout with some of these templates, or a handout from the chapter that these templates come from. But you'll see we have the use of that vivid verb X states, not all steroids should be banned from sports. As the prominent philosopher Socrates puts it, blah, 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 according to Mary Bassett, yada, 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 so on and so forth. So these are various templates that you can use that may help you implement or integrating quotes while also providing proper attribution to the person that you've borrowed the information from. And then we have some templates for explaining quotations. How do you go about explaining after you've put in the quotation properly? So here are some ideas. Basically, X is warning that the proposed solution will only make the problem worse. You could start by saying, in other words, so-and-so believes this. Or in making this comment, so-and-so urges us to blank. So you get the idea here. The essence of Bassett's argument is that blah, 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 right? So you're giving an explanation, providing some context for your readers. So, might be asking the question, is it possible to over-explain? Well, remember, not every quote needs to be explained in the same way. Some of them are quite evident, right? Easily understood quotes may need just a brief explanation and not a deep analysis. However, long quotes that are difficult or they're filled with jargon, special language, or hidden complexities might need a few sentences to explain or interpret. So it's best that you err on the side of caution. Too much information is better than too little. But of course, you also want to consider your audience and not make anything dumbed down for them, but provide at least as much information as you think they might need to understand your line of argument. So there are some common errors, and we have some examples here, and this is from a lesson plan from San Jose State University. So one of the most common mistakes students make when trying to incorporate quotes is failing to explain them adequately. So we have an example here. In almost every state, gay couples cannot marry. This means that they cannot receive the legal benefits that a married couple is given when they marry. In What is Marriage, Evan Wolfson details some of these benefits. If a couple is not married and one partner dies, the other partner is not entitled, blah, 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 blah. And then the person ends that segment with, not many people believe that not being able to be married is a big deal. So the student has done a fairly decent job of introducing that quote, but they don't explain the importance of that information that's in the quote. Why are those benefits important? What does it mean? You need to answer that question, so what, right? So they continue on. I'm not going to read that first section, but the explanation again in green is, in other words, gay couples are at a severe economic disadvantage by being prohibited from marrying legally. The financial ramifications of not inheriting a partner's assets could cause them to lose their home or their livelihood. So there we have context, explanation. Why is it important? So what, right? Well, this is why. So let's continue on. Another common error when quoting is to indicate that the author of the borrowed material is doing the quoting, when in fact it's you, the student, who is quoting the author. So we have here in the example, marriage in the United States is motivated primarily by love, but there are also several legal benefits that are associated with marriage. As quoted by Evan Wolfson, quote, because it is a legal or civil institution, marriage is the legal gateway to a vast array of protections and benefits, so on and so forth. So you see in this example, the author of the quote, Evan Wolfson, isn't actually quoting themselves as quoted by Evan Wolfson. Rather, the student is quoting him. So marriage, the way you fix this is marriage is in the United States is motivated primarily by love, but there are also several legal benefits that are associated with marriage. Evan Wolfson defends this, quote, because it is legal or civil institution. So you see there, it's just a slight change in the verb. All right, moving on. We're at the end. So here we see the citation from Kenneth Burke, as well as the chapter from They Say, I Say, which is chapter 3, as he himself puts it, the art of quoting. And that chapter is available in the resources folder for this week. Hopefully you find it informative and helpful. It's not required reading, but if you need clarification on how to do these things, it's a resource that's available for you. Okay, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Take care.